This video is made possible by Flight Sparrow. If you love aviation history and the hidden stories behind the world's most daring aircraft, don't forget to subscribe to Flight Sparrow, where we bring aviation legends back to life. A jetliner like no other in the 1950s, the world was entering a new era of aviation. Jet power was transforming the skies, and the Soviets wanted to prove they could match, or even surpass, the West. Their answer was a sleek new jet airliner. It looked futuristic. It flew faster and higher than anything before, and for a brief moment, it made the Soviet Union look like the leader of modern aviation. This was the Tupolev Tu-104, but what started as a triumph would quickly spiral into a nightmare, because soon after its debut, this plane earned a reputation as one of the most dangerous airliners in history. Not only did it crash, it did so in bizarre ways that baffled investigators. Planes were suddenly hurled thousands of feet upward, stalling at impossible altitudes and tumbling back to Earth. Pilots were left powerless, and passengers had no chance. This is the forgotten story of the Tu-104, the bomber-turned-jetliner that terrified the skies. The problem with Soviet air travel to the Soviet Union was vast, stretching across 11 time zones. A flight from Moscow to Vladivostok covered nearly 7,000 kilometers. But in the early 1950s, Soviet air travel was stuck in the past. Their airliners were piston-powered relics, slow, noisy, and cramped. And because they couldn't fly very far, long trips across the USSR required endless fuel stops. Flying from Moscow to Vladivostok could take 2 full days, with as many as 6 stops along the way. It was exhausting, inefficient, and nothing like the luxurious jet-age travel the West was beginning to enjoy. The Soviet Union needed something new, something bold, something that would showcase the power of socialism to the world. Tupolev's gamble, meanwhile, in Britain. The de Havilland Comet had already made history as the first jet airliner. It flew nearly twice as fast as older aircraft at altitudes high above turbulence. The future of air travel was clear, but the Soviets faced a problem. Designing a jetliner from scratch would take years of research and resources they didn't want to spend. And some leaders didn't even trust jets, calling them unreliable, fuel-hungry, and wasteful. Enter Andrei Tupolev, one of the Soviet Union's most famous aircraft designers. He made a bold promise. He could deliver a Soviet jet airliner in just 3 years. Not only that, it would carry more passengers than the Comet, cost less to build, and prove Soviet superiority to the West. How could he possibly do this? With a shortcut, the bomber that became a passenger plane. At the time, Tupolev had just completed the Tu-16 bomber, a heavy twin-engine jet designed for nuclear strikes over Europe. Rather than start from scratch, he simply repurposed it. The Tu-104 was, at its core, a bomber with windows. The fuselage was widened for passengers, but the wings, engines, landing gear, and tail came directly from the Tu-16. It was a Frankenstein of military parts, rugged, overbuilt, and incredibly heavy, but it was finished in record time, and by 1955, the Tu-104 was ready to fly. A propaganda triumph at first, it seemed like a miracle. With the Comet grounded after several crashes, the Tu-104 became the only jetliner flying passengers in the world. The Soviets seized the opportunity. They sent the jet across Europe, showing it off in London, Paris, and eventually even the United States. Western reporters were stunned. To them, it looked as if the Soviets had leapfrogged years ahead of American and British designs. For a few short years, the Tu-104 was the star of Soviet propaganda, proof that communism could match capitalist technology. A difficult airplane to fly, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Pilots complained that the Tu-104 was extremely difficult to handle. Its bomber-derived wings were designed for high-speed runs, not low-speed approaches at crowded airports. Takeoffs were dangerous. Landings were worse. The jet had no thrust reversers, weak brakes, and no air brakes at all. Instead, it deployed a giant drag parachute to stop before running off the runway. Inside the cockpit, controls were heavy and unresponsive. At low speeds, the aircraft was unstable and unforgiving. Flying the Tu-104 wasn't just stressful, it was terrifying. The bizarre crashes, then came the strange incidents. In 1958, a Tu-104 hit turbulence, both engines flamed out, and the aircraft plunged 20,000 feet before the crew managed to restart them. A month later, another Tu-104 entered turbulence, but instead of falling, it was thrown upward, climbing uncontrollably to 44,000 feet before stalling and tumbling back down. Miraculously, the pilots recovered, but the luck wouldn't last. Later that year, another Tu-104 was caught in the same phenomenon. This time, the crew never regained control. Everyone on board was killed, and the accidents continued. One after another, Tu-104s were being hurled skyward by violent updrafts. Some recovered, many didn't. The deadly design flaw investigators eventually uncovered the truth. The Tu-104's passenger cabin was much larger than the bomber it was based on, which caused its center of gravity to shift dangerously rearward, depending on how it was loaded. In strong updrafts, the aircraft naturally pitched upward, but the controls weren't powerful enough to fight it. Once the climb began, pilots were helpless, and the jet was doomed. It was a design flaw baked into the DNA of the aircraft. By 1959, after multiple crashes, modifications were made, and altitude limits were imposed. But by then, 144 lives had already been lost to this single flaw. A notorious reputation even after fixes, the Tu-104 remained dangerous. Nearly 20% of all Tu-104s ever built were eventually destroyed in accidents. Runway overruns, stalls, and mysterious in-flight disasters haunted the jet throughout its career. Passengers nicknamed it the Flying Coffin. And yet, in the secretive world of the Soviet Union, much of this never reached the headlines. But among ordinary people, the jet earned a reputation for fear. Folk songs were even written about the danger of flying aboard the Tu-104. The legacy of the Tu-104 by the late 1950s, the West had caught up. The Comet returned to service in redesigned form, and the Americans introduced the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8. The Tu-104, once a symbol of Soviet progress, was suddenly obsolete. And yet, despite its flaws, it left an undeniable mark. The jet forced the modernization of Soviet airports, longer runways, new terminals, better air traffic control. It trained a generation of Soviet pilots in jet operations, and it paved the way for more refined designs like the Tu-134 and Tu-154, which went on to serve for decades. The Tu-104 may not have been a success, but it was a pioneer, and in the story of aviation, pioneers often pay the highest price. Thanks for watching Flight Sparrow. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Tu-104, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss our next aviation story. Coming up, we'll be covering more incredible Cold War legends, from secret bombers to airliners that should never have existed. Stay tuned and keep your eyes on the skies.